everyone. Welcome to another installment of Eclectrocasts. This is Jeff, and we're on a kind of a countdown to the summer season here in New York. We're a week outside of Memorial Day weekend, and that is the unofficial start of summer, even though the calendar really starts it a few weeks later. I'm here with Kees. How are you, Kees?
I'm stoked. I'm excited.
Stoked. There was a Beach Boys song called Stoked. I don't know if you remember that one.
And when I was a kid, I associated it with a potbelly stove. But
oh, okay. See, it was just teenage surfer guys to us here.
Yeah.
You know. But anyway, we're really happy to have composer, video artist, educator, creative maestro Tom Luther with us for this installment. He's blushing. I can.
Hey, Tom. So good to have you.
Hey,
We're so happy to have you, Tom. We're really happy to have you.
Psyched to be here.
No, you're stoked. You have to be stoked.
I am stoked. And I do have a stove, although the stove is not stoked.
Tom comes to us from the great state of Maine. He's down east in Maine, and we're really happy to have him here. So, Tom, thank you so much for agreeing to be on our Eclectrocasts podcast and sit for an hour and talk with us about your art and really about anything you want. So we're very
Thanks so much for having me. This is great. I think what you guys do is brilliant.
So thank you. So just a point of interest for everybody is that there's actually three teachers talking with each other here today. Tom is a music teacher. Jeff teaches insurance law in New York State. And I am a teacher of teachers at the University of Rhode Island. So if on occasion we get into teacher land, just fast forward.
Yeah. Or no, you won't even have to do that, listeners, because I will edit it out in the post-production, so don't worry. I got your backs.
All right.
I think though that people should be aware that there will be, since we're teachers, there will be a test at the end of it. It's going to be about, 80% of your grade.
Yeah. Great. Tom, before we begin with some questions that we had about your music, can you just give us a quick rundown of where your art can be found easily on the internet?
Best place to look first is my website, which is tomluthermusic.com. I have categorized that into music, video, audio. I actually have my most recent work, Stroke of Luck, and a whole separate page up there. There's also my SoundCloud page, which I have as Tom Luther Music as well. And my YouTube channel, which I go under the moniker of Sphere Music. And I think that's about it. Yeah, that's it.
And Sphere Music ends on a K, right? One of the...
It's the Dutch spelling.
But the other ones end on a C.
Yeah, there's a ton of them out there. That's for sure. Again, those are all linked directly from my webpage. So if you go to my webpage, it's pretty easy to find my presence elsewhere.
Cool. Mm-hmm. We'll link all those in the notes on YouTube when we publish.
Fabulous.
And where can people purchase your music?
Amazon, iTunes, CD Baby. Those my two quintet records are there. I have some stuff on Bandcamp.
Okay.
Yeah, that primarily. I don't really have any retail presence and don't want one. So,
Okay. So, but if it's okay with you, we'd like to get those links from you so we can add those to the podcast as well. Okay, great. Because we wouldn't have you here if we didn't think your music shouldn't be listened to.
I appreciate that.
We're very excited, and you're one of those people that is very hard to pin down into a genre, and that's also something we really like. But begin talking a little bit about how on earth did you get into music? What it seems like this has been something that's been your life for a long time, and to some extent is your career. You're a teacher of music. So what were some of the events that sort of turned you to music and what helped you come to the insight that this was going to be your life?
Music for me really began with my parents because I grew up in a very musical household. Neither my parents had played at one point or another. Primarily, they were very insistent on bringing my sister and I to concerts, primarily New Jersey Symphony. I grew up in New Jersey, so we would go to some symphony orchestra concerts. We went to some Broadway plays. And then when I was in fourth grade, I remember my sister, when we hit fourth grade in the public schools, at least then in New Jersey, this is in the mid-'70s, that's when they would enter you could have the option to enter the music program. My sister went in as a flautist, and I was all excited. I was like, oh, you can do that? So when my turn came around, I had just discovered the music of Bruce Springsteen and was all about Clarence Clemons. So I was like, I want to play saxophone like Clarence Clemons. And not knowing any better, I just grabbed an alto because I think that's what they offered. So I started as an alto saxophonist. And then 2 years later, my mom said to both my sister and I want you to take piano lessons. You can take it for 1 year. And after a year, if you decide you like it, you can continue. If not, that's fine, which I think is a brilliant decision. I think a lot of times some parents will push that too hard, and there has to be some buy-in from the kid in order for this stuff to really work. So kudos to my mom for doing that.
Agreed.
I wound up keep going with it. I just absolutely loved it, and it was really just kind of a thing that I did. I was involved in other little kid stuff. I was playing baseball. I was running around playing Star Wars because that had just come out. And then my uncle, my father's youngest brother, who was about 12 years older than I am, had just gotten rid of all his LPs. And he gave my sister and I a bunch of them. And within those LPs was a record called Tarkus by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And I was like Miranda in So What a Brave New World, you can do this. And it really did blow my mind because I heard that record and I heard pictures at an exhibition. And coming from primarily a classical tradition, when I heard that, it really blew my mind that you could go from one domain to another, and it's something that I have never gotten over, and I'm thankful I've never gotten over it because it's been a guiding principle for me. Like, why would you ever want to do just one thing? And shortly after that, I was asked to join a rock band, which is just kind of a cover band, and I wasn't really interested in a lot of the music they were playing, but I'm like, well, it's fun. It's a rock band. I'm 14 years old, and this is going to be cool. And all of a sudden, girls are paying attention to me, even though I was absolutely terrified of them. I kind of got swept up into that to that end of it. And then through the rest of the other two records, I think that were really such a big part of my early musical learning was Gould's 82 recording of the Goldberg Variations and Keith Jarrett's Cone concert, which are still, I think, magnificent albums. And again, it was a moment of, oh my God, you can do this? How do you do this? And that's when, I think it was about midway through high school, I was like, okay, I want to do this for real. I want to go to music school. I want to pursue this for real. And I wound up studying the Hartt College of Music. I got a degree in music composition.
So that's very similar to me, and I think also to Jeff, that this a point in high school is where you sort of come to that decision where, I decided that I love music and I wanted to play in bands, but I would never want to be a professional musician. That life was not attractive to me.
It was to me.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, I went to Berklee College of Music for a year and a half, and then decided to get something to fall back on. So I kind of had to leave Berklee and transfer to a New York State university to get my English teaching degree, and that's what I did. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that's great. I tell so many of my students, you don't have to go to, you can get a degree in something completely different and still be a great musician. It's so possible, and you guys are proof positive of that.
Thank you.
It's I've had a couple of students who've been considering it, and the big choice is like, do I go to a conservatory or do I go to university? And that's what I tell them. If you go to a conservatory, it's very specialized.
Yeah.
and you're setting yourself up for some difficulty down the road. It's not impossible. I managed it, but it may not be the road you want to go. You may want to have there are things to be said about having a lucrative day job. I've had a few, and it's nice when you get the regular paycheck and you don't have to take every gig that comes along. That's, the annoyance of that is enough to like push you in that direction. But you can still be, whether or not you're a great musician is not really dependent on what school you go to. It's how much effort you're going to put in. Absolutely. And how dedicated are you going to be. Especially now, the internet is just this explosion of information. And I still think it's important to have a teacher to help you sort through that. I think it's a mistake to simply depend on online tutorials, at least at your beginning stages, but they're certainly useful to point you in directions.
So
I'm rambling.
No. So what was your path into teaching? Because that obviously is a job that gives you security. It gives you some benefits. It gives you an opportunity to save for retirement or a pension or something, which is like when you're young is like retirement. How do you spell that? But what is that? At some point it will stare you in the face. And so how did you transition into teaching? Because you've done many other things, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. I worked as a professional brewer in Boston.
Oh.
I worked as a janitor in a crappy mall in New Jersey. I've worked in coffee shops. I've worked in delis. Basically, my bad temper got me into teaching, and I'll qualify that whole story. For the better part of my adult life, I've always worked day jobs, pretty much for the reasons that I mentioned. When I was first out of school, I tried to make a go of it as a professional musician, and I was not really emotionally set up for that challenge, nor was I patient enough to deal with the kind of things that you need to do, the kind of gigs that you need to take. And I certainly wasn't in a position where I was confident enough to teach. So I went into just, all right, I'll get a job at a deli. I can do that. I know I'm a good sandwich guy. And, one thing, I've kind of bounced back and forth between all these different odd jobs in the food business. So fast forward to, when my wife and I moved into Maine, I got this job as a produce manager at this food co-op up north of us. And I had that job for about 9 years. And there was an unfortunate incident one day where I yelled at somebody because I thought they were behaving inappropriately. And it was public enough that the co-op decided, okay, we're done with you. Get out. So I'm basically got cast adrift. And my wife, God love her, said, you should not be in the food business. You have too much going on. I'm not allowing you to go back into the food business, which was amazing because over the years I had had a few students. I never felt I was any good at it. I never felt the kind of confidence to pursue it actively. And here I was kind of in a position where I'm like, well, maybe I should try it. And I'm pretty good at what I do. I can learn some of these skills. So I just started throwing a wide net. I pretty much went in every direction. I started to set up some of these general business things. I threw out some material to, I don't know if you guys know Pump Audio. It's a music library that the Getty people run. It's basically if people are looking for, they're making a commercial or a low budget film or something. It's music clearing.
It's kind of like stock photography in a way.
So I'm like, well, maybe I can get some placement music work. Yeah. Right, exactly.
Creative Commons license and all that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
That kind of thing. So in the crux of doing that and lingering in the back of my mind was like, well, I could try teaching. I've done that before. I've had some success with it. So I wrote to this local music school up here, the Mid-Coast Music Academy, and I got an interview, and they liked what I had to say, and I jumped into it. I also had a private student at the time who very fortuitously contacted me through a friend of a friend. So the ball it was one of those weird synergistic moments where the ball just started rolling. I'm like, well, okay, I better climb on now if I want to see if this is going to work. And as it turns out, it's been a wonderful experience. It's been such a tremendous learning experience for me, especially being associated with the Maine Arts Commission Teacher Artist Leadership Program. It's put me in touch with so many great people and so many great resources that my learning curve has gone up, and my confidence as far as teaching has gone up. So it's a weird road, but whatever. Life is
well. But
life
one of
is
the
weird.
one of the wonderful
happen.
things is that you bring your life's experiences to your teaching. They're not isolated. You can't separate yourself from who you are, and your past experiences have formed you, and you bring that into your teaching, and that could be, somebody like you can bring a lot more to the table than somebody straight out of a teaching program in college. They still have some growing as a person to do. So.
Right. Yeah.
I agree with that, Kees. I mean, you remember, Kees, when I had graduated college and the countless interviews I went through to get an English teaching job, and which actually led me to insurance because I gave up on the whole goddamn thing. But I look back, I wouldn't have hired myself when I was 23 years old. I wouldn't have hired myself. If I were the principal or the superintendent. So I think what you say is a lot. And Tom, I think that is a testimony to your journey, really.
Yeah, I one of the first things I started doing when I went into teaching full time was I started reading every book I could. Carol Dweck's Mindset, which is one of my absolute favorite books. There's a great book by a guy named Eric Booth called The Music Teaching Artist's Bible, and he has this idea, and I believe it. 80% of what you teach is who you are.
Probably 100%.
And I actually have increased that percentage to 100. Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. But that more than anything else has kind of helped buoy me through the whammy whammies of getting into teaching and being in the room with the student going, oh my God, I'm taking responsibility for this person's learning. Reminding myself that, well, I've had these really cool experiences and I'm going to be able to really help this person through whatever difficulties they're going to have. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think teaching is about, technique. Yeah, we talk about technique and things like that, but that's all stuff that you can pick up on YouTube or whatever. I think the real value of a teacher is being that coach and being that mentor and saying, okay, here's a couple of ways you might want to try to practice this. Mm-hmm. So it's less about information and more about just being there and being kind of a role model for them.
Well, it's learner focused. So often teachers will make it about themselves, and it's not about themselves. It's not even necessarily about the content, or the process is maybe a little bit more important in some cases, but it's about the learner. And some people can do it, and some people can't. And it's not that they're unable to; it's just that they don't. Well,
those people are not willing to face themselves in a moment of teaching. I always tell my students who want to become teachers that you
it's a great way to put it.
Have to work on personhood, your own personhood, and the personhood of others, and that is this idea of wholeness, right? Striving towards wholeness, and to becoming a whole person. So that kind of like segues for me into how our talk about teaching also finds its way into your own musical creativity, because you're a very reflective person, very self-reflective. You seem to be very keen on the process of discovery, this sort of openness and allowing yourself discovery. There is a sense of spontaneity, of improvisation, but you're also kind of interested in giving some of that up. And you use Max for Live to allow the computer to make some decisions. And you sent us a piece called Decide that I think you put together particularly for our discussion today. So can you talk about these different elements of discovery, of a journey, if you will, of narrative, in which decisions are made, and decisions can be made in the moment, but decisions can also be made in advance. And how do you play with all those elements? How does this come about? And for those who are going to be listening to the track Decide, how did it express itself in that track?
Well, I think I'm still kind of going back and forth about the title. Decide, that was the best one I could come up with. But it's really what the piece is about. It is all about decision making for me, and I think this has been influenced by my study of improvisation, because improvisation is all about making choices, as you guys know. It's you have, if you're whether you're playing as a soloist or as in a group, you're always making a decision. Do I go from this pitch to that pitch? What do I do this rhythm? And none of that is really intellectualized. Mm-hmm. What I'm kind of interested in doing is how I make those decisions. There's really two parts to this. I'll come back to that in just a second. But the first thing for me is I like to be surprised when I'm working, particularly with this generative stuff. I like to sort of lay out, okay, these are my options. What if this were to happen? Or what if, these things were reversed? And usually there's such a tremendous number of options. Why not simply create some kind of other algorithm or some kind of process to make those decisions for you? Because you have these moments like, oh, that was interesting. How come how did that happen? And it really turns into a self-study of how I make decisions about writing. With Decide, I basically, it can be easy to look at something like this as algorithmic or generative as like, oh, we're just giving everything up to this random process. Mm-hmm. The reality is a lot of this stuff was set up. It's kind of like, the analogy I make is to like a pool trick shot. If you set everything up right, it looks like there's a lot of weird circumstantial stuff going on, and hopefully it looks amazing. And if you set it up right, it all goes to crap. But, a lot of Decide, it was kind of predetermined. Like the 13 chord progressions, that was a simple chord progression that I'd played out on the piano one day. Mm-hmm. And my original idea was, okay, well, these really work well back to back. Maybe I'll include a part where I don't think I wound up doing this. I said, you could probably play them backwards. And I said, well, what if they were just mixed up? Mm-hmm. What if I had no choice about which one would happen? Mm-hmm. So I did that, and I wound up liking how it turned out. And it's a technique that I've used before, and it's always interesting as an improviser because you don't know what's going to happen. You put yourself in this position of, I don't know what's going to happen next. Isn't that going to be interesting? So for some people, it's terrifying. And for me, sometimes it is, but
you are very willing to roll the dice, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I weight them. I load them too.
So I think it would be really cool to give everybody a listen to Decide.
Okay, cool.
And this is a piece that Tom wrote just for specifically for our program. He wanted to come at us with something fresh and something that he hasn't done or hadn't done before. So he composed this to premiere here. So we're going to listen to Decide. Again, we're talking with composer, musician, artist Tom Luther. And here's Decide here on Eclectrocasts.
when you roll the die, then that becomes a challenge, right? And I think that's another thing, aspect of you, is that you are a self-challenging person. You don't really need to be challenged by other people. You challenge yourself in many ways. And can you talk a little bit about that inner drive that you have to be challenged?
I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's absolutely true, Kees. I think that's spot on. I think what's integral to my process is getting myself in over my head. When I first started studying Max, I knew I had this idea. I wanted to do something. I had no idea how it was going to happen. So I'm like, all right, and I committed to this thing. So I kind of gave myself this deadline. I was like, okay, you're going to have to do something with this. I just enjoyed that because it just puts you in this position of constantly learning. The kind of musician artist that I don't want to be is the kind that we all know that is just happy to play the gig, and we're going to play Blue Sky the way everybody does it all the time, or Autumn Leaves in the same crappy tempo, and that's not doing the art or yourself or the world any favors.
Right.
And I think my grievance with the world right now is how commodified music has become and how ubiquitous it's become. And I think a big piece of that, and this is apart from the SoundCloud community. The SoundCloud community is awesome like this, but the basic pop culture, it's the same stuff over and over again. And I get so crazy listening to these reviews on NPR of these laudatory reviews of the stuff. I'm like, God, you guys are recycling The Last Poets, or you're recycling the Almonds, and why are you doing this? Stop it.
Well, it's new to them because they have a whole new generation of critics who weren't around when the Almonds were around, who were barely around when Beck was around in the early 90s,
right.
So it's new to them,
Yeah.
But that's how it is for all of us. When I play Cream or Led Zeppelin, there are people who are saying, well, I heard it done better by, Leadbelly or Robert Johnson or something,
Oh, right. So, sure.
You can't fault the younger generation for that because we fell into it also. Or Keith Emerson and Mussorgsky, so it's the same sort of thing. But I think one of the things that's really, really cool about what you had done with Decide is how you started. You actually ended up with something very. It sounded very beautifully composed to me. It didn't feel to me like it was some kind of random thing. It felt
like
the sequence and the arrangement and the way the chords moved together, even amongst the other sections, had a very, very journey type arrangement to them.
That is the cool thing, right? That is Tom's hand, right? Tom's hand is all the pieces that are put in there and the protocol that he generated. But in that protocol, you give stuff out of hand.
Right.
Yeah.
And you submit yourself to things maybe not matching, right?
Yeah.
That's a risk that you take. And that's what I think is
it was an arrangement. The arrangement made sense.
Yeah.
It made sense even independent of your will.
Right. Now, Tom, if you use this algorithm, if you will, if you use this protocol, will it be the same every time, or every time you start it come out different?
It'll come out slightly different. Yeah, there's all kinds of there's a whole decision tree that goes on. It's not going to be like it'll always be the composition, the piece of music Decide, and those chords will always be there. But what sequence they happen in, the sequence of the chords is one decision that gets made. Whether that sequence is actually sequential or randomized is another decision. Mm-hmm. Whether the sounds that come out are multi-timbral or a single timbre is another decision. Whether the timbre is static or, again, randomized. There's a rhythm track. I was particularly proud of this because I started getting into, I don't know if you guys have fooled around with fast Fourier transform at all.
No.
No.
Oh, my God.
I know what it is, but
You want to talk about a rabbit hole, man? It's crazy. You know, when I started fooling around with it, Max is very good at that because they have a bunch of objects that support that and some great tutorials. I can have a 512 band EQ. Gimme! So I actually randomized that an equalization on the rhythm track, and at points you can hear that where it's kind of bouncing back and forth between these different frequency spectrums. And I basically just selected a couple, and I didn't go nearly as far with that as I could have because I didn't have that much time to finish it. And it's just an overwhelming number of options. But yeah, there's a ton of different. I wanted the thing to be able to be the kind of thing that I could start the program and just let it go, and it would always be kind of doing something different or interesting.
Right.
I have to. A lot of this work comes directly out of a piece by Brian Eno called 77 Million Paintings. That is the thing that got me really interested in this. If listeners don't know, 77 Million Paintings is a multimedia work by Brian Eno, who was a founding member of Roxy Music and has had this tremendous solo career. So what 77 Million Paintings is a generative artwork. It's a light work with music. And the way he set it up, he used combinatorial mathematics to make sure that no combination of visuals and music was ever the same, and it goes through something like 500,000 different combinations before it actually repeats.
Interesting.
It's really interesting. There was a I found out about it watching an interview of his, and I'm super psyched because this summer there's a compilation called Music for Installations that's coming out. It has all that stuff in it.
Oh, cool.
But he ran it in New York. He ran it in Italy. It's been, it was a thing you needed to see live.
So keeping with the Eno idea, you could let your 13 different loops or phrases or chord progressions, go on indefinitely. Well, it wouldn't be indefinitely, but it would be close to it. For our purposes, it would be indefinitely because we wouldn't be able to track the similarities after a while necessarily if it were still random. But that is your own oral oblique strategies sort of.
Basically.
Thing. You could make a whole album of that, and it would sound the same track, but it would sound completely different, especially if you treated it differently with
Here's another cool thing you could do is because 13 is a Fibonacci number.
Yeah.
And the Fibonacci numbers as a sequence. If you take a pair, they are roughly in the golden section.
Yep.
So you could take subsets, Fibonacci subsets of it. So you could do a set of 8 instead of 13 of those, or 5, or 2, or 3, right?
Yep.
And so have it randomly choose a subset of the 13, a random subset of 8, and that is 13P8 or 13C8. That is 13 times 12 times 11 times 10 times 9. If you can quickly figure it out, number of possibilities that you could select 8 out of 13 pieces and then have it play with that and then have it randomly select. So now, right, it is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and 13. Those are the Fibonacci numbers up to 13. So, there's like hundreds of ways that you can play with this, but just when you chose 13 pieces, you chose a Fibonacci number, and then, light bulbs go off in my head.
There was probably some unintentional, it was probably one of those honor thy mistakes as a hidden intention kind of things, because I am a huge fan of the Fibonacci sequence. I did, Bartók used that constantly. I did an analysis of his third quartet when I was in college and just all over the place. I don't presume to understand them past knowing the basic sequence and how it works.
Yeah.
But, it's something that occurs to me when I'm thinking about, okay, well, how can I set up these different sequential cycles? Let's try a Fibonacci number and see what happens.
Right. But what's behind Fibonacci is the idea of iteration. So, so you take an output and you put that back in, right? So you take two numbers and you add them to get the next number in the sequence. So that's called iterative because you're building the next element from prior elements or from a single or a cluster of prior elements. So that would be another interesting thing to do with a piece that you put together is to think of it as an iterative piece. So how the choice of one element leads to the choice of another element by some sort of an iterative function, right? So I hope we haven't lost half of our 5 million listeners at this point.
We might have gained about 3 computer scientists in the process. Kees, you had said something about, when you were talking about creating an iterative function, you were reminding me of Markov chains, which I'm also fascinated by.
Yeah.
And I'd fooled around, so maybe some kind of Markov Fibonacci thing, if my brain doesn't explode.
Yeah. Well, I haven't worked with Max, but you know,
you should, man. You would love it.
Yeah, maybe this
Such
summer.
a great program.
It's just, you know, I'm doing a lot of research for my research projects at the moment for my work. So I haven't been making any music. I've just been playing my guitar and really, really enjoying the hell out of that. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Following that creative. I gotta say, I had wanted to. In my heart of hearts, I would have had that project you and I were working on with the XY printer.
We'll get to it.
Which is still on the dock, and I'm going to get to it.
Sure.
But I've just been distracted by other shiny things that.
Well, maybe we can play with sort of this mathematical idea with that, because those are all discrete, absolutely, like 1-2 second bits, which I recorded from, you know, a coffee machine or a shredder.
Yeah.
So maybe we can, over the summer, we can, you know, off and on play with that a little bit, and I'll have to learn Max in the process, because I do have it. All right.
Yeah, it's a great piece of software.
So let me. Okay. So another part of your work and what has been developing is this. And you talked about Brian Eno and using visual images and pieces of video and sound, but you've done quite a bit of that work as well. You've written soundtracks, or that's one of the things you offer, I believe, on your SoundCloud page. There are some examples of soundtracks that you have put together.
Yeah.
But you've also done some really interesting work with video, and particularly your most recent work, Stroke of Luck, which is related to your recovery process from having suffered a stroke about a half a year ago or so, or a little longer.
Yep, Labor Day,
September.
Yeah. Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about the interplay of the visual and the sonic in your work?
Sure. Yeah. So my focus with that sort of thing is how there's 2 main focuses. The first is how can visuals and audio work together in a more synergistic manner. In other words, not simply as the music is setting the mood of a scene in a movie or something like that, but how can the actual data of an audio signal work with the actual data of a video signal, which Max, through their jitter program, makes it easy to explore. It's not simple, it's simple, but it's not easy. Yeah. That's the thing. So I like the idea of visuals creating some kind of impetus to change the music, and the music changing the videos in a kind of feedback loop. Probably one of the best examples of this is the pieces I have on my YouTube page called So Much I Want to Do, which is this self-generating stream of animation that directly affects the music that's being played, which directly affects the kind of animation that happens, and so on and so forth. The other bit, as I've come to realize, the more I've been a musician, the more I've realized that we tend to be really insular, and audiences aren't really grabbed. There's very few people, I think, now that simply want to sit in a room and listen to music. There needs to be some other form of engagement. And maybe we could finger MTV for this, but you could probably go back even farther and look at the Ballet Russe, for example, who had this idea of the whole artwork, and I can't remember there's a fancy German word for it. But there's the whole artwork idea of encapsulating things that are visual, encapsulating things that are oral, and I'm just really attracted to the idea. And part of it's trying part of it for me is also trying to understand how visual artists think and how do you create a narrative as a visual artist, and how can that be translated into music. It's really just about how does the communication work for me. And having had the stroke, that actually kind of fed into it, because one of the things that I started doing was drawing. And I've always been a doodler since I was a kid, but I was in with my occupational therapist one day, and I had used the word apocryphal, and she's like, "My God, that sounds like a great word for a great title for a comic book. You should do something like that." And I'm like, I should. So I ran right down to Staples and got a pad and some pens and just started drawing cartoons. And that led to going, I wonder really how visual artists do things. And a friend of mine, Mark Kelly, has been a tremendous influence. He's a brilliant artist, and he always has you go to his shows and there's always such a strong sense of narrative. You sit back and you see it instantly, of these abstract found object instructions. You're like, oh my God, yeah, I see the continuity. I see how that works. I'm not sure how he does it, but I'm really, really have become quite interested in exploring that.
Of course, in our daily lives experiences, sound and vision and smell, at least for, most abled people, are not separated, right? They all happen simultaneously, and we process it. And then in our art, we seemingly separate those senses out, right? And at Eclectrocast, we've really become interested in artists like you who are seeking to sort of not see those processes as so separate, but to join the narratives into a single experience. So using video is it might seem like an obvious choice, but it having put together some podcasts for ourselves for YouTube, it is not a trivial thing to convey a narrative. And the idea of the idea that it really attracts me is to use the least amount of visual information that is necessary, and sort of this minimalist idea, which sort of resonates with a lot of current music too.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's something. The idea that I've been thinking about a lot is, how do we think about stuff? I wish I could remember the name of this author, but a buddy of mine had just he cited an article, a New Yorker article this guy had written about how there's a separate kind of cognition that happens at your instrument, or if you're a carpenter with your hammer and your tools, you think in a particular way when you're working in a certain domain. And I don't know if you're familiar with Howard Gardner's work on multiple intelligences. I feel like that locks right in there, because when I'm working at the piano, there's a kinesthetic and there's a musical intelligence. If I'm drawing, there's also kinesthetic, but there's a spatial intelligence. So this interest in how many different ways can we express a single thought, and what does it look like? It's funny, my wife, we were talking yesterday. We were talking about, I've been obsessed with the tune "I Loves You, Porgy" from Porgy and Bess, and been practicing it. And I commented, I really want to learn this thing in all 12 keys. She's like, "Why would you want to do that?" I'm like, because you learn so much in each key. You learn different things. If you're playing in one key, it's like, okay, well, this voicing sounds good. But if you move to another key, it forces you into another voicing or another posture. And you're like, hey, maybe this will be valuable in the first iteration or the first combination of this thing. So if you expand that idea into multiple genres, it's like, okay, here's my idea expressed musically. What does that feel like when it's expressed visually? Or what does that feel like if it's changed into this tactile object that you can actually interact with, which is one of my what do you call them, bottom drawer projects. I have a couple in the basement that are these interactive objects that you need to physically interact with. They're not like musical instrument interfaces. They're just objects that you do something and there's a response, and you do something else, and you start to generate music. And
do you know Brian McNamara from Australia? He goes by the artist name Rare Beast. We interviewed him last year, I believe, and he makes kinesthetic sculptures and he hacks
cool.
like existing electronic toys. And he's a circuit bender. He also He also makes his own circuit and sells his own very interesting crafted mini synthesizers that just have one or two knobs on them. But that's exactly what he does. Is he creates kinetic sculptures or things that have a crank on them and or wires you touch. And I highly recommend check him out. He goes by Rare.
I'm totally going to
Beasts.
check him out. That's awesome.
Yeah, Brian McNamara, awesome guy.
Rare Beasts.
Awesome guy.
Okay.
So,
Nice.
I'd like to sort of step back to this idea of surrender. You call it.
I love that you use that word. I absolutely love that.
Maybe
that's exactly it.
This idea of surrendering, which we talked about in Decisions. You took a track from David Bowie's album Lazarus, and you made it. I mean, it's recognizable when you listen to it. However, there is this, there is also this weighted probabilities in there, right? So, So so the loaded dice to make it a little bit easier, right? So can you? And you talked a little bit earlier about, you do not just want to do a cover. You want to take a piece and you want to give it your own interpretation. So how did you do that with what you titled Lazarus Dreaming?
Oh yeah. So the whole story of that is I saw this blog post of that a friend of mine put up of 1,000 Italian musicians playing Rebel Rebel, and this was right around the anniversary of Bowie's death. And I had been thinking about it, so it was again one of these weird confluences of events. I was like, oh wow, and I was listening to Rebel Rebel, and honestly, it was never one of my favorite Bowie tunes. I have actually done arrangements of other arrangements of Bowie for my jazz group. We used to do Lady Stardust, and so we did some other stuff. But I'm listening to it, I wonder if there's something I could do with it. The mood had struck me, so I just went over to the piano and I learned the tune real quick, and then just started realizing how much fun it is to simply improvise over it. And the structure that I took was, on the verse form, if you will, just became this open-ended thing. And I would improvise, and I decided in my own mind that the trigger to move on to the chorus or the bridge, whatever you want to call it, was to actually play that line, ba da 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 da, the guitar riff from that. That would become the oral trigger to say, okay, now we're moving on. So I did a little piano improvisation of that, and then thinking more on it, I'm like, what else can I do with this? How can I add on to this? So I did the second one, and that's where Lazarus Dreaming came from, where I involves some weighted probabilistic elements. So I basically took the audio recording of the piano improvisation. Ableton has this lovely little function of converting MIDI information into, or converting, it can convert audio, harmony, or rhythm into MIDI information. It's basically a highly educated guess on the part of Ableton, which I love, because that was another chance element that became into it. It may get it right. It may do some things that are unexpected.
Surrender.
I'm like, well, whatever. I just need the information. So I got the MIDI information and said, okay, I basically took the basic mode of the tune, which, I considered to be, I think I used an A major or A Lydian scale for it. And for each one of those pitches that occurred in the MIDI information, that would send a signal to Max, and then Max had a decision in some cases of 4 different notes that it could play. And some notes were weighted more heavily than others. And the way that was really cool, the way Ableton translated the audio information, is the rhythm was all over the place. I'm like, well, that's great. It's going to sound like wind chimes. So I just basically let the thing fly, and after the improvisation, I just put this thing on. I assigned a patch to it in Absinthe by Native Instruments, and just let the thing go. And it sounded really good, because it was kind of like this ghosting after effect, which I thought was kind of appropriate for it. So it was really just a big experiment for me, and it was another way to kind of explore that tune some more. And it's funny how some of the simplest tunes and simplest pieces oftentimes will generate the most interesting stuff after the fact. There doesn't have to be this tremendous complexity into something. It can just be a simple little 3-chord thing that, oh my God, there's so much
Tom,
here.
Something in that track stood out to me that, I've listened to almost everything you have on SoundCloud, and it's an incredible volume of material. And you seem to have an affinity for a bell-like sound. So there is, in Lazarus Dreaming, there is this sort of almost continuous bell, almost like a mantra, like a Buddhist bell, or like a yoga meditation kind of a bell. But you use that like bell sounds in quite a number of your tracks. What do you like about bell sounds? What is the attraction?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that question. I've been thinking about it all morning. I think the first thing you can point to is being a piano player. That you have that percussive sound in your ear.
Yes.
Also Fender Rhodes sounds, that kind of thing. Again, we'll point to Brian Eno, music for airports. There's a ton of really cool bell sounds, and it's one of my favorite Eno records, next to like Discreet Music and Neroli or something like that. It's really interesting. I think bell sounds are pretty interesting because they have this hard percussive start, which is all irrational number harmonics, and then it settles out into these. It's the evolution of the sound.
So it grabs your attention, right?
That's so interesting.
With the sort of the immediate, like almost like a little bit of chaos.
Yeah.
And then it grabs your attention, and then you get sort of drawn into the settling, right? And that becomes then almost like meditative, it seems.
Yeah, it's funny when you mention the Buddhist the
prayer bells,
prayer bells or whatever. I was reminded of a story that I was told by an old teacher, and he was telling me about this student studying with a master teacher, and the student was badgering the master teacher to tell him the secret of their training, and the master teacher said, "No, I can't do that. You wouldn't understand." So years go by, and the student asks him again, and goes like, no, you're not ready for it. And finally the student says, "I'm going to punch you in the mouth if you don't tell me." And he's like, "I'm not telling you." And so the student says, "The heck with you, I'm leaving. I don't want to study this practice anymore." And fast forward 10 years, the student's like sweeping up in front of his house, and a rock flies across his yard and hits a piece of bamboo and goes clock. And the guy just has this awakening. So I think the bell sounds kind of do that. They kind of create their sonic awakening. They just boom. They grab your attention, and then there's this space to say what just happened, which I think is key for me. It's what just happened. This non-judgmental what just happened leads to tons and tons of questions for me. So maybe that's it. I don't.
Yeah, no,
could be they just sound cool too.
No, but
I don't know.
It is something that I've personally been thinking about for a long time, because to get back to teaching, I recommend my students use a triangle, or like one of those bells that they have at a cash register. Where you need somebody. Oh yeah. Or at the post office, you hit that bell. Yep. And it's like people have almost no choice but to pay attention when that sounds. It's a sudden sound, but it is at a pitch level that our mind cannot ignore. It is.
I think it's frequency more than pitch necessarily.
Right. Frequency, yeah.
I mean, the frequency components that are all involved.
Yeah. But anyway,
just on a spectrum. Yeah,
it's something.
I heard that children's crying has a particular frequency spectrum that gets to adults, like biophysically, just nails you. Like, oh my God, I got to go deal with that.
It makes them go to the liquor store.
Yeah.
Yep. Bacardi figured it out, didn't they? Yep.
Okay. I feel badly for teenage pregnancies, because those people can't even go into a liquor store legally.
No.
Oh yeah, they don't have the option.
Or it makes people take up smoking, I guess, right? So hey.
Anyway, I didn't want to divert, but shall we listen to Lazarus Dreaming?
Let's please.
Sure.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Again, guys, thanks for being here and listening. And engaging in how much fun we are having in this conversation with Tom Luther, composer, musician, artist, and we are going to listen to the track Lazarus Dreaming here on Eclectrocasts.
So, Kees, I love that you mentioned you used the word surrender, because that's actually what it is. And again, that comes directly from the influence of Brian Eno. He has this whole idea of, we're really obsessed in this culture with control, right?
Yeah.
Not as obsessed with this, what he calls the surrender moments. We tend to idolize the people who control stuff and they make stuff happen. But the important things to us, and these are Eno's words, they're not mine, and I agree with them. The really important things to us, like arts, sex, religion, that stuff all involves surrender. It all involves giving a piece of yourself up. And the analogy that he uses is surfing, where you have the surfer who uses some control to orient himself at the top of the wave, him or herself at the top of the wave, and then they just give up. And then you just say, okay, I'm just going to try and situate myself as this wave carries me along. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think the creation of art is very much like that. I don't want to go into a piece of music or a piece of visual arts knowing exactly what's going to happen. I want to be surprised. I want to be as enraptured by it as hopefully the audience is. A big moment for me as a young musician was hearing Ornette Coleman say that he didn't really know what was going to come out of his horn until he played it. I'm like, thank God, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, yeah.
And if it's cool with Ornette, then it's cool with me. Because for years I had this idea.
Some people would say he actually never actually found what would come out of his horn even after 60 years of playing.
Man. You know, people need to they need to listen to Shape of Jazz to Come and then reassess that. You know?
I know.
There's a number of really great Ornette records out there, but whatever. That's enough of the Ornette fan club. I had a thought. The thought was a good one, and it was going away. We said Ornette. I had this idea, and I think a lot of people get this idea in their early parts of their world. And unfortunately, I think a lot of performing arts is being taught like this, that you have to know exactly what's going to happen, and you train so hard that you almost become this jukebox. Mm-hmm. Like, here's a series of clever licks and clever sounds that I know are going to work, so I'm just going to kind of string them together like it's paint by numbers or something. And there's a reluctance, and I've seen this in some of my students, there's a reluctance to allow yourself to be surprised by something.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, that's why I'm always lecturing, you didn't just make a mistake, something unexpected happened. So try and think about it in that context and do something with that unexpected moment. But it sounds bad. Well, don't judge it.
Right.
And I tell them the Herbie Hancock story about the Stockholm chord, where they were playing with that great quintet with Ron Carter and Tony Williams and Wayne Shorter. And, you know, you can see Herbie tell the story on his Norton lectures, the Harvard Norton lectures from 2014, where they were playing So What? And in Herbie's own words, at one point when the energy was really building, he played absolutely positively the wrong chord and was just crushed. It was like, oh my God, until he heard what Miles did with it. And Miles basically made that chord work in that texture, because Miles was listening and heard not a mistake, but something unexpected. And so, that was interesting. Let me see what I can do with this. And too many of us are obsessed with the idea of we have to get it right.
But there is something under that, right? And that is like a tremendous amount of skill that gives you that ability, right? So, you know, when I started playing in a band in Holland, when we were rehearsing and I played a wrong note, which happened rather frequently, they would all stop. And they would say, and I would at the beginning say, "Why are you stopping?" And they said, "Well, you played a wrong note, and so we have to start over." And you know, and it is because you're lacking skill, because it's not a wrong note; it's an unexpected event, and so nobody knows what to do with it. So the fact that Miles could do something with it, of course, there's a tremendous ability and skill underlying that. So.
Well, that's why Miles picked the musicians he did. He didn't want somebody to go up there and play it safe. He fired Hank Mobley after one tour in the early '60s. You know, Coltrane left, and he got Hank Mobley, who was a great hard bop saxist, wasn't the most adventurous kind of guy, and then went on to try to find somebody who would end up being Wayne Shorter. He went through Sam Rivers and a couple other people before he got that.
Yes,
but he wanted
George
that.
Coleman.
George Coleman, that's right. He got George Coleman, who Tony Williams wasn't a big fan of either. You know, so it's that whole way that the band gelled together. In case that's what you're talking about, it's that skill that some people are looking for. You were looking for people who can change when you make a wrong note, and they weren't it.
But that you're absolutely right, Kees. That there's skill involved, but we'll never get that skill unless you have the open attitude.
Right? Oh
unless
it's not separable. It's not separable. But if you have the open attitude and you cannot. You are not able to skillfully adjust, and then you just are going to get very frustrated. So this is why I forget which jazz musician said that, but something to the extent like you got to study hard, you got to learn all that shit, and then forget about it and just play.
Yeah,
I think that's true. But I think here's the thing, though, with jazz improvisation, any improvisation, but since we're kind of on the jazz thing here, when I was at Berkeley, a lot of my fellow students, co-students, went to buy a Charlie Parker Omnibook in the key of C, right? So they thought the way to learn bebop is to learn Bird's licks so that you can play over any chord progression, and you can play endless 2/5 ones, and you can do the turnarounds, and you know which
Right.
notes are going to work and which aren't. And that's why I'm not a good jazz player, because I never wanted to do that. I wanted to explore the fretboard with my ear. I wanted to hear how playing a certain pattern would sound differently over 3 different chords that are very close harmonically together, that don't almost atonal in a way, to see how the notes would react to each of those things. And if it sounds wrong, well, then it sounds wrong. I'm not going to learn Bird's lick. Why learn Bird's lick? Everybody played Bird's licks. Nobody wants to. And so that whole thing that you guys were talking about really following what is going to surprise you, that surprises me. I don't think I'm a good jazz player, but I kind of like hearing what I play, even though it's, if in the context of jazz pedagogy, it's wrong.
But this ties so well together with teaching, where we sort of began our conversation, is in teaching, in almost every moment, unexpected things happen. And it is, and it is your openness to that. And this, I work with student teachers who are completely thrown by unexpected things because they've written a plan, and if it doesn't go exactly as they planned, then they don't know what else to do. Which is fair. That's where we all start.
Sure.
But it is,
Absolutely.
it is like, if you become a professional musician or a professional teacher, is you kind of live in these unexpected moments, and that goes back to surrender, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
You want them to happen.
Absolutely.
You want them to happen.
Yeah.
I want them to happen. When I'm teaching something as dry and boring as insurance, right? I want those teachable moments where people can relate something they're learning to their lives that just comes out of nowhere.
Right. Right. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's why art's integration in teaching, I think, is so important, because that almost naturally creates that kind of a situation.
But it's also at the heart of jazz, isn't it, Jeff? You put out a tweet about like people just don't say, well, I don't get it, and you're saying there's nothing to get, right? There's a lot to feel. Right?
I tweeted her body is jazz, or like jazz, or something like that, and always tying something sexual into it. And people would respond. People would respond to me with, complex, sounds the same over and over and over again. Can't follow it. Can't dance to it. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, the thing is, you need an open heart and you need open ears. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Right.
I went to a really interesting series of talks that was it was put on up here at the Farnsworth Art Museum, and it was actually put on by the Farnsworth and the Center for Maine Contemporary Art, and it was adjudicated by this guy named Robert Dell. And the title was "What is Art?" So I was like, "Oh, this sounds like a great place to get into an argument with somebody. I'm going." But he was had some really smart ideas about it, and I came out of it. My takeaway from that was exactly what you were saying, Jeff. Is like there's way too much judgment when people start approaching art. They come into it with too many expectations, and they're not open. They're not experiencing. They're not asking themselves what just happened. They're instantly going into the, well, I like it or I don't like it, or I'm confused. It's like, no, what's happening? Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a saxophone playing. Okay, the texture just changed. Now there's a piano playing. Okay, what's going on here? And it's my dream for the future is someday we'll all be open enough that you'll walk down the street and there'll be a poster there that says event. And you won't know whether that event is going to be a poetry reading, a jazz concert, somebody belly dancing, and you'll just say, I think I'm going to go to that. Why not? I'm not doing anything at Friday at 8. I'm going to go to the event and see what the heck it is.
That's a cool
idea.
You know what, Tom? I hope your next release, in whichever format it's going to be, is just called music. Just release an album called Music.
With a plain white label with music on it.
You leave the Beatles off of the bottom right and just say music. Stuff. There you go. Get a little bit more ambiguous. Stuff.
Hey, you guys, I want to shift the conversation a little bit. Well, just a little bit. You, Tom, you do have a work with a quintet, the Tom Luther Quintet, right? And you produced.
Yes. That's actually kind of.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. It was quintet's currently mothballed, but yeah, that's been something I've
right. And
you've
produced 2 albums with them. I don't think exactly the same formation on each album. I think the bass player is different on each album. Yes.
Yes.
But
yeah.
nevertheless, it does, because the work we're listening to today is your solo projects. And projects you do fundamentally out of your own desire and interest. But you also do collaborative things. Like the two of us have decided to do some work together, and it will eventually happen. So you do have an interesting collaboration.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you play in a band, you collaborate. Can you talk a little bit? You know, the third track you sent us is called "Mars on a Starry Evening." Is not exactly a musical collaboration, but it was based on a drawing and a poem that was given to you by your friend Hannah, right? Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about, in general, about what you get out of collaborations, and then talk a little bit particularly about the work you did with Hannah's poem?
Yeah, well, I'll actually love to start there, because that piece, Mars Starry Evening, is the best kind of, for me, is the best kind of art project, because it just happened spontaneously, where I came into work one day and she had left the poem and that funky drawing on a slip of paper, and I knew it was from her immediately because I recognized her writing style and I recognized the picture. I'm like, oh man, that's great. And it just inspired me to start that afternoon to go, I've got to go do something with this. I've got to go. And I just thought about the words, I thought about the tone, and it's basically a large electronic improvisation that I kind of sculpted to some degree. Those kinds of I guess you could call it collaboration over time. You know, it was a transient collaboration. There's not one that sort of is happening in the moment, like a jazz quintet or a singer-songwriter gig, but it was a collaboration of inspiration, I guess. And I've been lucky enough, my friend Mark, that the piece I did, So Much I Want to Do, the title of that actually comes from a title of one of his sculptures that he gave me when I got canned from my old job. I had initially wanted to buy it from him because I was so enraptured with it. It was, the title of the piece was So Much I Want to Do. And he just said, you know what, man, I'm going to give this to you because the only condition is that you actually make good on that. You do everything that you want to do. And I thought it was such a beautiful thing to say and a great gesture that motivated me to start working on this other thing. So there are certain situations. My favorite idea of collaboration is when something kind of almost random like that happens, and it inspires you to like do something. Like the other morning, I was outside with the dogs and thinking about living in the country and how everyone associates it with this a quiet life, and realizing how goddamn loud it is with all the birds. It was unbelievable, the chatter. So I ran right inside. I got a Zoom. I have one of those Zoom field recorders, and I came back outside with it. Yeah,
I think we all have.
And I'm like, I got to record this because there's source material here, and I'm currently working on some stuff that involves that. But stuff like that for me is amazing, where it just kind of feels like it falls into your lap, and you just respond to it, which is partially, as you say, Kees, it's partially surrender, and it's partially being the improviser.
Right.
Like, okay, I've just been dealt this hand of cards. What am I going to do with it? Can I do something with it? Feel good. As far as the other kind of collaborations I've done, the singer-songwriter stuff, I largely did because they were friends of mine, and they said, hey, man, can you play on this record? I'm like, yeah, sure. It's a different kind of playing. It's a different kind of challenge, one that I don't really do on my own.
Identify yourself
so
as a sideman for those. I think that's your word.
They basically say, well, here's the chords, here's the tunes. Can you play an interesting part that goes along with this? And I try and capture something that gives them the emotional quality that they're looking for, and that's interesting for me to play. What's kind of kept me out of the rock and roll world is so much of the that kind of thing, which is a bias from having played in too many cover bands that play too many Journey songs.
So you were a journeyman at some point.
Yeah, I was a journeyman. Yeah, first band, they're like, yeah, let's learn Don't Stop Believing. I'm like, well, this is kind of cool. The piano part's okay, and then we're gonna learn separate ways. And I'm like, are you kidding?
Well, you know what?
I'm not doing anything.
Every music has its place, and sometimes that's fun to play, and sometimes that's boring to play, and sometimes fun to listen to. But it's good that you can weave in and out of different, not only genres, but different levels of interest. You know, sometimes I know you feel like you could mail it in, and sometimes you're really engaged in it, and that's just part of what we are as humans. You know what we.
But also in that kind of collaboration, doing something very simple can make an incredible contribution. So, for example, I played in this band, and we did a song together. We constructed a song together, and all I did was play one chord, and I played it. A strum from the bottom string up to the top string, right?
Nice.
From the high E to the low E, and so bring once in a while. That's all I did, and without that, the song would have not worked. And I got such pleasure. I cannot tell you how much pleasure I got from just adding that, being able to add that. It was. You know, it's like once in a while, have this guy play the triangle and hits a triangle just at the right moment, and it just makes it work. And I think there is some pleasure in that, so it doesn't always...
Oh, absolutely.
Simplicity,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Getting back to Miles and Herbie said to Miles, I don't know what to play anymore, and Miles says, so don't play anything. And then when Herbie did play something, Miles would say, see, what you just played was a bitch because you didn't play anything before that. So that's just how it works,
Yeah.
Yeah. What did Monk say about the loudest sound in the world is silence?
Yeah.
It took me a while to learn that lesson when I was in high school and just after college, because I was so interested in this progressive rock, and then later really hardcore contemporary music. It was all about notes and rhythms and this and that. Yeah. And having transitioned into what you could loosely call an ambient or experimental electronic thing, the value of sound and the value of placement is so much more paramount. And I think it's reflected in my playing, because my second quintet CD actually got a review by Down East magazine, and the guy was spot on. He's like, he said I basically, as a pianist, set up a bedrock, and I was not a showy player, and that's great. That's what I want. I don't want to be well, look what I can do.
Right. Hey Tom, I'm not familiar with those records. What's the instrumentation on the quintet records?
It's basically piano, bass, drums, trumpet, and saxophone.
Okay.
And
very standard.
Trumpeter doubles. Yeah.
There's some YouTube videos of it, right?
Flugelhorn.
You have some YouTube videos of it?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't get to see those. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Trumpet obviously doubles on flugelhorn, and
sax doubles on
first
flute.
record. Well, no, he probably could. We had him playing clarinet for a while, but then he got really. He was a great player. This kid, Gideon Forbes kid. He's an adult. Gideon Forbes. I was lucky enough to have these two brothers, Gideon and Jacob Forbes, who were monster players. And like all good young players, they got really good gigs, and the way they went.
Yeah.
And I just haven't really had the wherewithal to start that group up against. I don't know how it is for you guys, but real listening gigs that are really worth doing, are so few and far between up here. And it's like, I'm tired of going to the coffee shops with an open pass the hat kind of thing. I'm like, I don't need to do that. Curious about this, or
no.
Although I will probably start doing it because I really enjoy the musicians and playing the music, and I just kind of have to set the other stuff aside. But anyway, long story short,
do you play with your students?
I try to.
Yeah.
I mean, I only have one piano in the studio, so it's a little bit difficult. The priority is to have them playing the at the most during the lesson. And if I have to, there are times where I can think better on the piano. So I just say, hey, let me sit down and I'll show you something. This is what I'm talking about. But I try and keep them doing most of the playing.
So all your students are piano students. You don't teach any other instruments?
Well, actually, I teach laptop.
Okay.
I've done a couple of digital music courses where I've taught Sonic Pi, and I'm doing an overview right now. We're going to start getting into Ableton on Monday. I mean, it's just a very brief overview of how this stuff works. I've had a few composition students, and I'm actually coaching an adult rock ensemble right now, which has been a tremendous amount of fun.
That's cool.
Because they had a really great breakthrough moment the other night. They started out their night all kind of playing the same way. It's a diverse ensemble. It's two hand drummers and guitar, bass, piano. There was only 4 people there, but of the 4 people, they were all kind of playing in the same. It was like 4 people in a room playing,
Yeah.
and by the end of the night, there was one organism playing, and it was
That's
really
nice.
beautiful to
That's
hear.
nice.
And you could tell they got it, they hit it. They were in the zone, and I'm like, that's it, guys, you did great. That's fantastic.
They didn't play any Journey tunes, though.
No, they were playing Neil Young tunes, though, by the way, thanks to me, because I've been fiddle fooling around with an arrangement of Like a Hurricane. I was thinking about that as a solo piano piece for some of my younger students. Because it's simple sequence of chords and easy to arrange. And I said, well, teach these guys these chords real quick, and we'll just let it roll around and see what they do with it.
So Tom, you used the poetry of Hannah in your track, but you did something
Yeah.
to it. I think you used like a computer voice or something. So before we going to ride out on Stopping by Mars on a Starry Evening, can you talk a little bit about how you got the text into this track? And it's a short but very sweet piece, and particularly the reading of the poem or the words are a little bit of a juxtaposition to the feel of the piece. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about that before we ride out with it?
Well, I knew, I wanted to have the text as part of the piece. I could have simply done it as a musical response with no text, but I'm like, the text is too interesting and it's too important to be ignored. So I knew I didn't want to read it because I just didn't feel like that was. I didn't think it was appropriate for it to be a male voice reading it. It didn't seem like that coming from Hannah. I mean, it could have been, but being really kind of self-conscious about the sound of my voice and not feeling like I was a good. I mean, performance poetry is a unique sort of thing. There's people that do it really well, and then people like me who shouldn't do it at all because I haven't practiced it or studied it. And I wanted to get it done quick, so I'm like, well, I knew I could have friends who could come over and do this for me. But like, no, I want to get this thing done now. And I remembered that Google had a speech function as part of their Translate program. I'm like, well, maybe that'll work. Let me plug the text in, and I plugged it in, and I had the thing set on English, and it spoke, and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't really do it. And I had been thinking about how cool it was. I don't know if you guys know the Brian Eno, Rick Holland record, The Drums Between the Bells. It's a magnificent record. It's the poetry of Rick Holland with Brian Eno's music. And one of the things that Eno does is he gets quite a variety of different speakers, many of whom English is not their first language, so they speak very heavily accented, and it's really, really, really engaging. So thinking about that, I said, well, this is Google Translate. Let me see if I can plug this into another language. And quite arbitrarily, in fiddle-fooling with this thing, I discovered that if you write the text in English and then immediately pull up another language choice and hit play, not in the translate function, but in the original phrase that you want to translate, it will speak it almost accented, as if, like, for example, a French person would try to pronounce these words. They'd pronounce it as a French person should. Or Dutch or Danish or Finnish or something. I think I wound up using the Danish voice because that was the one that was most interesting to me. And it'll occasionally make funny little, like if you write I in some languages, it'll be pronounced E because that's what they do when they see the text I. So I wound up doing that, and it came out. It's a little stilted at some point, but it still felt like it worked to me, and it was a quick and dirty solution. Going back, if I could find ideally some woman who spoke some other language and had enough of that accent that could speak it.
This is where we have found like Twitter or social media to be very useful because several of our friends in the past have asked people to speak a text. I actually I remember. Kim Ruger, Belly Full of Stars, she asked people to speak a particular sentence. I'm trying to look what it is, but and my wife spoke it in for her, and she had people from all over the world speak that one little sentence, and they just send a little file to her. So I think and that's the power of the of the social media.
That's a resource I
think, is
wish
that
I
you-
thought of exploiting. I'm kind of a social media incompetent like that, but now I know.
Hey, we'll get you in the fray. I really hope that, I mean, I have to say, I've really enjoyed talking with you, Tom.
Yeah, this has been great.
I
Really appreciate
I've
it.
been wanting to do this for a long time, and it's finally happened.
Yeah.
And I really sincerely hope that you get some more people listening to your music, because it's really, really, really good.
Oh,
I
appreciate that.
one of the things Jeff wrote in an email is, you're just very masterful at voicing the chords, just in very, very nice ways, and that's a very special talent. And
Thank you.
so
Thank
it's
you so much.
just been really exciting, and I want to thank you for
Very
speaking
interesting
with us
conversation,
today.
Tom. Thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate that. And just you had asked a question about where that influence was, Jeff. That is specifically Charles
Yep.
Mingus and Thelonious Monk. That's what's driven how I set chords
Yep.
up in my
Yep.
love for harmony. And Bill Evans too, obviously, but I think it's been more Mingus and Monk
Yeah,
than the primary
yeah.
influences.
Of course, Monk played chords like he didn't know what the hell he was doing, but he did, and everybody else said, "Wow, that's great." And Mingus knew too much what he was doing, I think. So,
Oh yeah. I mean, his harmonic structures are just. I show this to my jazz students all the time. It's like, okay, you want to get your noodle baked?
Yeah, but
check this guy's music out. And
But
just
do you
look
know
at
what?
the
I mean, no
intelligence
matter
behind it.
what Mingus did with his, how complex he could get, there was always the blues in there. He always figured out a way to keep the
Yeah.
blues in there, which is why he is, obviously,
Yeah.
one of the obviously consummate jazz composers,
Yeah.
after Ellington, without a doubt. So
Yeah.
it's just endless, I mean, Mingus's catalog is vast, and you could spend a good part of your lifetime really absorbing it,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm still trying.
right. There's so much music, so few hours.
Yeah.
But so
All right,
it's going to
so
ride
let's
out
ride
on
out.
Stopping by Mars on a Starry Evening. I think that's kind of an interesting title. Not only does it show your friend Hannah riffing on Robert Frost, but there's a little Bowie in there with the
Yeah.
Mars, and there's even a little Van Gogh in there with the Starry Evening, and so
Yeah. Right.
And a little shopping.
Stop.
Stop and shopping.
Stopping. Right.
Yes. But appreciate the time, Tom. Thank you so much. Good luck with everything. We'll keep
Yeah,
track of
absolutely.
you. And we'll be sure.
Thank you
to,
so much.
To hook up with. And
we'll come visit you.
Yeah, we're all geographically close
Yeah,
enough to
just-
drive a couple hours and just do it.
And make some place in New England
Yeah.
unsafe.
Yes. There's some good
No,
pubs
I mean
up here.
what we should
Absolutely.
do is we should rent a some sort of rehearsal room or something like that, and bring
go
a
nuts.
guitar and an amp and whatever you want to bring, Tom, and we should jam.
That's a great idea. We could do actually. Why stop there? Just do a performance.
Yeah.
Hey.
Enough planning that could work.
And we'll feature that
I'm getting goosebumps
on Eclectrocasts after it happens. So
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So now that we've said
guess
it, now it has to happen.
Yeah.
So now we gotta
all right,
think
thanks
about
for
it.
listening,
Well,
everybody.
we can edit it out.
All right. Oh yeah, I can edit it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. This again is Stopping by Mars on a Starry Evening. Tom Luther, piano, Maine, composer, very thoughtful, very intelligent, very entertaining. Enjoy. Take care, guys.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Most stars are these. I have no clue. And for that matter, nor do you. No cities, not moon, no star, hazy listener, cash